Penso che possiamo iniziare.
I think we can start. This is the right time. I would like to thank all of you for being here. It's really exciting to speak here, considering the event we are celebrating today, which has been organized by the Fratelli Tutti Foundation. I would like to warmly thank Cardinal Gambetti, who is the soul of these events, and our dear Father Francesco Queta, the medicinal director of the Luis Guido Carli University, hosting us here. And of course, to the whole organizing committee of Fratelli Tutti Foundation and the distinguished guests who are here with us. And I would like to introduce them in the order of their presentations. So the first speaker, after a short introduction I'm going to make, to tell you something about the rationale for the work of the workshop of the third sector. I'll give the floor to Maria Mercedes Rossi, who represents the association Papa Giovanni XXIII at the United Nations in Geneva, and which is committed to peace, to the eradication of poverty and respect of human rights. And then there will be Professor Stefano Zamagni, an ordinary economics professor, political economics professor at the University of Bologna, and adjunct professor of the International Political Economy at the John Hopkins University Bologna Center. And we would like to really welcome him. And I would like to thank them for sharing their great skills, so not only technical skills, but especially ethical skills. So we are going to start talking about this event that has been organized by the Fratelli Tutti Foundation, whose name, which is in line with the Pope's encyclical, reveals the objectives that we are pursuing, which are aimed at creating a better world, quoting Pope Francis, through some specific instruments, that is brotherhood and social friendship. The initiative is called Be Human, and it means the commitment of people of goodwill operating in different fields. So we have different fields, and we have 12 workshops. Now they are being held throughout Rome. So not only this one at Luis, but there is one at Cancelleria, another one at Coni, another one at Villa Lubin, and so on and so forth. So what are these workshops? These are the voices of the different social sectors that are aiming at the same goal. So revamping the fundamental values of our society, first and foremost, the central role of people and their dignity, the dignity that is rooted in the concept of creation, the creation of man in the image and likeness of God. And so life is a gift. And also humans are a gift, and they also have the gift of dignity. We know that contemporary society is still beset by the pandemic, and so now there is little dialogue in contemporary society, but we also have to think about the fact that the global emergency has taught us that nobody can save himself or herself alone. So now we have to hope for a single humanity in which we can really feel brothers and sisters. So there are too many people alone, and this is also due to global communication, and as such it provides an open image, a broad image, but instead it has dangerous effects of individualism, isolation, and this is also promoting fragilities and creating new preys and new predators. So this is one of the causes of loneliness. But the current society has changed its objectives with a lot of individualistic goals to the detriment of the needs of other people and projects to promote the common good. So Be Human wants to start a path towards retrieving values, trying to involve confessional and non-confessional worlds, as said by Carlo Gamete in the press conference of some days ago, when he said that the intent is to bring man back to tying relations through brotherhood. And this is also said by the Holy Father during the meeting today. So we have to rewrite the meaning of human. So we really have to have a different approach to the current anthropological and ethical meaning of the self. So starting from Pope Francis' proposal, which is fraternity, is not easy, but history is supporting us, and we cannot forget the disrupting strength of young people who in 1943, Calamandoli, they wrote the future of the country they wanted, and they dreamed of Italy, and they wrote a document of 99 points, which was the basis of our constitution. And people and dignity were central points, and the whole organization of the state revolved around these points with principles of shared responsibility, national solidarity, and mutual interest. So this document was a true example of connection between the values of the gospel and the values of the constitution. And so today this can give us a push towards a real paradigm shift that we all hope for within Fratelli Tutti. And so this is a long introduction, but I really needed to do that to explain on which we have been working with this workshop. So this workshop of the third sector working group is composed of different associations. So according to different charismas, these associations are the backbone of the community-based civilization for which Italy is famous in the world. So these third sector entities were born in the 30th century in central Italy, in Tuscany, in Umbria, and so they had an ideal goal with a vocation, a mission, and service, and they operated for the community. So the roots of the third sector are such, and as said by Professor Zamagni, this should be called first sector and not third sector. So, so we worked on three values, so peace, social dialogue, and social inclusion, and the subjects were already pointed out by Pope Francis in Evangelii Gaudium and also in Fratelli Tutti, and they are the fundamental part of the declaration Be Human signed by Nobel Prize winners 1 year ago. So the stimulus given by the Pope is to promote fraternity, an essential link so that we are mutually mutually supportive, and so that we can work for the common good. So fraternity, which means solidarity, subsidiarity, mutuality, reciprocity, cooperation, and through the strengthening of the common good, it can also be a factor for reducing poverty. And this is a very high value because it can actually rebalance the concept, reconciling the concept of freedom and equality. But we need a particular atmosphere for all this. So we need peace, especially now and in the current geopolitical scenario, as said by the Pope. We really need a consistent and endless commitment. So these principles should be the building blocks of an ideal social order nurtured by dialogue, social friendship, which also promotes dialogue and also the ability to listen to others, and also fraternity. So our working group has really assumed two possible actions, but then Giulia Milani will tell us how we managed to reach this conclusion from a methodological point of view. I would like to thank Mrs. Hartin. I'm here to tell you about how we worked. So we had different entities from the third sector that are working for social justice and common good. So we hope that this working group is going to be a meeting point for those who want to promote fraternity. So the pillars of our working group were social friendship, political love, two terms that have accompanied our work. So the participants have worked, and they have been called because they represent associations that have capillary presence around Italy. So they have been called to be enzymes of a new society. So we have worked to make the paradigm of fraternity universal. At the beginning, we had important, fundamental goals. For example, so we managed to reach hundreds of people with our networking work for human fraternity, and so a new social paradigm, and imagining a place where a social dialogue was open to everybody, also promoting the teaching of peace. We have worked on these instruments, and now Mrs. Satti is going to present this. So we formally met for the first time in January. We are going to go on working because our objective is not to have short-term objectives, but long-term ones. So the next objective will be the Jubilee of 2025. Actually, our dream comes from the meetings, symposia, workshops promoted by the Fratelli Tutti foundations. So at that time, we dreamed of creating this working group. So we recognize ourselves as human. This is how we work together. So we shared documents to study and reflect. We drafted a lot of papers, but we shared knowledge and experience that generously all participants shared with others. So we had many debates, and this was one of the most important aspect of our work. So in the work that we did in the past and the work that we're going to do in the future, we decided to be credible witnesses of brotherhood. So we really believe that fraternity can be lived, it can be sought after in any place. So also especially in these working groups that are taking place now in Rome. So we have to choose brotherhood, fraternity in our lives every day and in the places where we live and work. This is a great universal value of these 2 days of work. Well, thank you. Thank you, Giulia. Really, really thank you. And very quickly, let's look at the two macro actions that Julia mentioned. The first is a proposal to set up an office, an organization, a ministry for peace, a kind of institution on which we can actually work, and through which we can actually work for peace and to promote societies based on fraternity. So in addition to Retinopera, we also had the Association Comunità Papa Giovanni XXIII, and for years, thanks to the indomitable work of Mrs. Simoncelli, who is here, and whom I thank, has been pursuing in the name of common good. So there's a project of a new institutional architecture. So no one of us is not looking at peace. So we are aware that it's absolutely necessary to work on peace, that the concept of peace should be shared and should be also circulated, because without peace there is no development, or national, international level. It's not by chance, for example, that the Holy Father today is speaking in the workshop for children, and he wants to talk about peace with children because he wants to sow the seed in order to create a new society of peace with children. So Fratelli Tutti wants to constructively share this roadmap started by the Association Comunità Papa Giovanni XXIII until the Jubilee, in order to reach a common good, which is very important to revamp and restructure the civil coexistence parameters for people. And then the second assumption is to create a social agora. So we said that one of the central points on which we reflected is dialogue, because dialogue is a tool that tries to go beyond individualism, so making debate open. So the social agora is a place where we can have an open and multidisciplinary discussion and analysis of the most urgent social themes, and so having an exchange of diverging views by listening to others, by finding shared solutions, laying an emphasis on diversity and the possibility to accept other people's point of view, trying to go beyond individualism. So in any field, we really need a change going back to people, to persons. We cannot do this alone. That is why we can assume in a social agora a constant interaction with institutions, economic organizations, trade unions, financial and cultural organizations, and all the representatives of societal requirements and needs. I would like to conclude giving the floor directly to our friend Maria Mercedes Rossi, who is going to speak about fraternity as an instrument to build dignity and peace for people, and again, peace as a pillar for the development of individual social and individual personality. Thank you. Well, thank you. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the Fratelli Tutti Foundation, Father Occhetti, Sandra, Giulia, and all the organizers for having invited me to participate in this meeting. I would like to start my presentation hinting at the current situation of our world today. We are living in a world context that is characterized by very complex and manifold global challenges threatening prosperity, peace, and the sustainability of the planet. So I would like to mention some of them: geopolitical tensions between great superpowers, China and the United States, proliferation of conflicts and wars, with the current war in Ukraine and the conflict between Israel and Hamas, with the horrors perpetrated in Gaza, and then climate crisis with the loss of biodiversity, and then extreme weather events, and also the threat of new pandemics. Just gone beyond COVID-19. It's still there, but there is also a threat of new pandemics. So migration, for example, forced migration due to climate change, and also humanitarian crises. So food crisis and hunger, increase of extreme poverty. For the first time, there was actually an increase, and also growing inequalities in the countries and between and among countries. The crisis of multilateralism and the weakening of the United Nations. The rapid technological progress, and then the challenge of artificial intelligence, a great subject that we have to discuss today. The growing extremism and fundamentalism and intolerance in many parts of the world, and the growing sense of fear and indifference of Western populations. Well, these are global challenges that really require cooperation among international organizations, nations, the private sector, and the civil society. It's a great appeal to the role that the civil society has in dealing with these challenges. Pope Francis, in the encyclical Fratelli, Tutti, provides an in-depth analysis of these challenges and appealing to the collaboration of nations and the international community with an inclusive answer to create a fairer world. So the whole teaching of the Catholic Church, social teaching of the Catholic Church, for example, the latest encyclicals such as Laudato Si, Fratelli Si, Laudato Deum, and last but not least, a declaration of the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith, Dignitas Infinita, are luminous beams for humanity and incommensurable asset for reflection. But I would like also to mention something about fraternity and then about peace. In our Christian faith, being brothers and sisters and recognizing ourselves as a single human family derives from the fact that we are human beings created in the image and likeness of our Father God. And so there is a union of three people. Each person has an intrinsic ontological dignity independently of origin, race, religion, or social conditions. And the Declaration Dignitas Infinita under paragraph 1, and I quote, infinite dignity which is founded in the being is important for any human being, whatever state or circumstance. This principle, which is fully recognizable by reason alone, is the basis for the primacy of human beings and their rights. So fraternity as a guiding principle of Christian life, and we know that our theological foundations in the New and Old Testament, in the teachings and example of Jesus, the golden rule, the commandment of love, but also a principle rooted in many religious and philosophical cultural traditions. It implies the concept of human solidarity, of, for example, mutual respect, affection, and bonds. And it's based on the idea that we are part of the same human families. So we share the same dignity. So living brotherhood and fraternity individually, it means that we have to respect others with passion and love, like the Good Samaritan who dirts his hand in rescuing a person attacked by thieves. But at the collective level, fraternity means the commitment to promoting in society and in politics solidarity, social justice, and common good. and also to overcoming inequality, so promoting human rights and the dignity of any human being. And as said by the Declaration on Human Fraternity of June 2023, there are three types of fraternity: personal, spiritual fraternity, social fraternity, and environmental fraternity, because we're called to be brothers and sisters with the Mother Earth. That has generated as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, and in December we celebrated its anniversary, and that Pope Francis considers to be in the modern culture the closest reference to the principle of inalienable dignity of people. Under Article 1, it reads, all human beings are born equal and free in dignity and rights. They are equipped with reason and conscience, and they have to act in spirit of brotherhood and fraternity with one another. Article 25 reads, any individual or any person, better, has a right to sufficient standard of living to protect their health and well-being of their family. And then Article 28, which recites, any individual has right to a social international order in which rights and freedoms enunciated in this declaration can be fully implemented or realized. So we have to create a international social order. This is a major challenge, and it is the greatest act of charity, as said by St. John. It is Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights leads to the so-called emerging solidarity rights that derive from the concept of fraternity. You know that in the three generations of rights, so for example, civil and political rights inspired by freedom, and then also inspired by the French Revolution. And now we have to recognize the rights inspired by fraternity. So we are talking about this at the United Nations. These rights are the right to individual and collective development, and that was recognized in 1986 by the United Nations, by the General Assembly, but it is also hampered by rich and powerful countries such as Western countries. And another right is the right to peace that was recognized as human right in 2016, yes, with one vote. So, and also the right to healthy, clean, and sustainable environment, recognized in July 2022. These are the so-called solidarity, emerging solidarity rights. So, as Association of Giovanni XXIII, so we have been working with the United Nations for years. So one of our priorities is the commitment to advocacy and to the promotion of solidarity rights, for example, the implementation of the right to development and the respect for the right to peace. And we're also fighting, maybe you are going to laugh, but we really believe in this, to have the recognition of the international solidarity right. Because international solidarity is a principle which is unanimously recognized by all, even within the United Nations, and it is in all documents, in the Charter of the United Nations, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in the Vienna Declaration of Human Rights of 1993, and in all the recent documents, in the Paris Accords, in 2030 Agenda, the Millennium Goals. So, but politicians, diplomats speak a lot about international solidarity, but nothing is done. So in most cases, so COVID-19 has shown this very clearly. So we say that the time has come to give a legal status to international solidarity, because international solidarity should not be seen only as a moral principle, because it's logical that love cannot be imposed, but it can be proposed. But the international solidarity right comes from a need for justice, to have equality. That is why it's not just an issue of charity, but of justice. And also during the pandemic, we saw this in a tragic way, and really need to develop these so-called antibodies of international solidarity and of fraternity. And in the current world context, the third sector is playing a fundamental role for these rights. And now I'd like to talk about peace. So fraternity and peace are strictly correlated, they're mutually supportive, and they are fundamental pillars to build a juster society. So peace is a complex, dynamic, and multifaceted theme which cannot be reduced to the absence of conflict or violence or negative peace, but as researchers have said, we have to talk about positive peace, which is an all-inclusive concept, the protection of human dignity, of fundamental rights, development, the promotion of social justice, non-discrimination, tolerance, and dialogue. And the same for the rule of law and responsibility. Positive peace requires a broad interpretation of violence, not only direct violence, so a person or group's violence, but structural violence. And we are actually living in a world that is really violent. Father Oreste always says this, because there are unjust structures generating violence, the market, the economy. So we really have to embrace an approach based on human rights, because peace and human rights are mutually supportive. St. John the 23rd in Pacem in Terris writes, and I quote, "Peace is just an empty word if it is not based on the order that is based on truth, built on justice, nurtured and animated by charity, and implemented under the aegis of freedom." And he said the common good is best safeguarded when personal rights and duties are guaranteed. And St. Paul VI, in his message for the celebration of the 5th World Day of Peace, said in January 1972, if you want peace, work for justice. If you want justice, if you want peace, work for justice.
And so during his pontifical period, he repeats this all along. And this is why positive peace is closely linked to social and economic development, because they are both focused on the human being, on the person. The person is at the center, and their needs, basic needs. And this is also stressed in the 2030 agenda for sustainable development, the objective number 16, where member states, UN member states, promote peaceful and inclusive and just societies. In 2016, the General Assembly, the UN General Assembly, has finally voted. Italy, unfortunately, did not vote. Italy abstained, and others, however, a declaration on peace, for peace. So we moved from an interstate outlook to a new outlook that is focusing on victims of conflicts and violences. Article 1 of this declaration states that every single person has a right to enjoy peace, and that this right entails protection and prevention of all human rights and individual development. Article 3 is the one that we have also requested and encouraged, which requires sustainable and adequate measures for the implementation of the right to peace. So when we speak about adequate and sustainable measures, this can be implemented through the intersessional meetings in Geneva that member states have recognized in the various infrastructures oriented towards peace. And the Ministry for Peace, which this is the proposal that, which is the object of our campaign that we are advocating, we believe is the most effective measure promoting and advocating for peace. We as a foundation, we basically in our language, we have also proposed this kind of wording because Don Oreste always used to tell us throughout the centuries man has organized war and now it has time to organize peace. This is the John Paul II's foundation. And this is precisely what is fueling us and encouraging us to act upon in Geneva. We have put forward this proposal of a Ministry for Peace in 2017 within the Council of Human Rights. We organized 2 events in parallel involving all of the member states, and we also published 2 little pamphlets. One of the 2 speaks about our action on the field. It's called Dove Operation as an alternative to conflicts and violence in the field. And I must say that this declaration, which has been signed by 30 Nobel Prize promotes states, advocates for states to promote joint efforts, that is through the establishment of a Ministry for Peace. So I was really rejoiced in reading this. Now, the UNESCO committee states that since wars start in the mind of a man, and it is in the same mind of a man that the defense and the for peace must be conceived. And this is how education, formation are truly vital and at the core to promote a culture of peace. And this is our true challenge, the challenge that we shall carry on as third sector. We should start with the younger ones, with our children, to convey a culture of peace. And this is one of the many tasks and roles of this Ministry for Peace. That is, promoting a culture of peace. As I said, that this implies a number of measures, promoting development, equal opportunities between men and women, also the respect of the freedom of expression, intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue. And so we must educate the younger ones, but I would say humanity at large in terms of peace and fraternity. I would like to add one more element. We have to always keep in mind that peace is an ongoing process. So once we reach peace, let's think about Europe after the Second World War. We had many years of peace, and now unfortunately we have a conflict in our continent, in the Ukraine. We cannot take for granted that peace will last forever. So we necessarily need efforts in order to pursue and to do peacekeeping policies, rather. I believe that we will never have a social justice if we don't become men and women and just people. We can never enjoy peace if we do not become mild, peaceful, and nonviolent people. However, all of this is feasible. And why? Because in our world, we have a lot of advocates of human rights and of peace, and they pay often with their same life a commitment towards justice and the defense of peace. But there is a price to be paid. We have to be aware of that in one way or the other. So as an example among the many, I would like to speak of San José de Apartado. It's a community in Colombia. Since 1997, they have declared themselves neutral compared to the armed conflict. You know, they had the paramilitary, the FARC. They're always targeted, and often they have paid a price for this nonviolent because over 300 members have been killed. The last 2 Sepulveda, 30 years old, Edison David, only 15 years old, the wife and the brother of one of these members who have been killed, or have been shot rather, nearby the village La Esperanza. They are rural peasants, very simple, but they have decided to live non-violence, and this is how they paid a very high price, and they are a witness to us. Our voluntary of the so-called Operazione Colomba, Dove operation, they live together side by side, and this is also a very important example. I'd like to conclude by saying that we are called to be men and women, people of hope, and the Jubilee is Pilgrims of Hope. That is the title, who journey together as one single people, not promoting devotion, but revolution also. Of course, we do need devotion, but revolution is important. People of denying the individualistic domus economicus, imposing and dominating, but promoting justice, solidarity, and the respect of human rights, and building a society where the last, the disabled, the marginalized are not excluded, but are instead the protagonists and the players of their development, and can open the way of families. As the book of Ezekiel tells us, the people of God had everyone, the woman, the blind, the deaf, the pregnant woman, and many others. This is the people of God that we have to truly build in respect of all differences. For us as believers, we have a certainty that Jesus has risen. The principle of peace has overcome sin, the world, and death forever. So although everything seems to lead us to say how terrible is the situation, don't lose trust, because we must be optimistic and we have to be committed. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marcia Mercedes Rossi, that I lost looking at my papers. I didn't maybe present her sufficiently. I didn't say that she represents the association John 23rd at the United Nations. She has also been a doctor, is expert in infections. She had, during 20 years, she has serviced as a doctor, missionary doctor with the Red Cross in Zambia. So we thank her also for all her active contribution. With her contribution, we have understood that fraternity can be one of the keys which leads us to peace. However, fraternity, Professor Zamani, allow me now to give the floor to Professor Zamani, but it certainly can have an impact in promoting a social economy of solidarity, which can basically set up equal opportunities. And I would say that this is truly the core of the intervention of Professor Zamani, which I don't need to basically introduce, because his name, his scientific contribution has really given so much to the world of business and of cooperation. Allow me, however, just to mention that he's been president of the scientific committee of the Italian Association for the Cooperatives and Nonprofit Organizations of the Third Sector Agency, had a lot of many awards, 2 degrees honoris causa in Madrid, in Prague. So you're a true example. He has also been awarded the Giorgio Lapira Award for Peace, the first international award, Economy and Society, of the Fondazione of the Foundation Centesimus Annus. He's also Gold Medal of Merit. He's author of a number of publications. Last but not least, he's also been extremely active, giving a lot of energy and inspiring in our group, so I really thank him for his contribution. Thank you. Thank you very much. The floor is yours, Professor. I will try to focus my attention on the question of social economy of the third sector, because I think that Maria has already spoken about peace. Allow me to add just one comment to what she has told us, that is simply to further strengthen the idea of setting up a ministry for peace. We know that Galtung, I think well known to all of us, years ago made a distinction between positive and negative peace. The negative peace is a lack of war. The positive peace is instead as basically changing all of those structures and institutions that do not create a long-lasting peace. Why do I mention this? Because after all, if we accept negative peace, then we can have, we simply have the MOD, so the Ministry of Defense. But if instead, as we pretend, and I believe now time has come to speak out and say that we do need a positive peace, then we do need a Ministry for Peace. Because in fact, we truly need to have one entity able to set up these institutions promoting peace. This is why civis, pacem, para. So this is what you say. Before we used to speak about peace for war, but now we are speaking about peace for peace, so for well-being. So we certainly do not agree that the Ministry of Defense is the only way towards peace. We believe that we should go beyond, and that we certainly must add to that. And this can be achieved by saying, are you happy with negative peace? Well, then you're happy with the Ministry of Defense. Otherwise, we need to do something more. And now I come to another question that I would like to try to answer. And that certainly leads me also truly to develop a social agora. What is the exact meaning in our current and contemporary societies? These expressions like third sector, social economy, what is exactly the meaning? These are realities. These are actual realities. What kind of horizon should we include them? Otherwise, when we speak about initiatives in Italy, when you say we have the word in Italian sense, and it has two meanings in Italian. It has a meaning and direction. So if we take the word as direction, which is the direction we are heading towards? So in most of our countries, in Italy as well, we are shifting from a bipolar social order towards a three-pillar social order. Now, of course, the bipolar has the state on the one hand and the market on the other. For a long time, I would say, particularly the businessmen and the economists, who are, well, a corporation I belong to, and they believe that in order to truly have a successful situation, it would be sufficient to organize a very efficient state, possibly not corrupted, well organized, not too bureaucratic, on the one hand, and a very efficient, productive market, which leads to the fact that private goods, assets are given to the market, and the public ones are entrusted in the hands of the state. And this was a bit the idea. I must say that very naively, this has been a bit of a lie that has been told for decades. And this, the fault is also due in the hands of professors, because professors are also somehow teaching, in universities through their publications, reviews, articles, and whatever, books. So this is why for some years, I would say at least at the turn of the new century, we speak about a three-polar state, so state, market, and community. Let's say that state is state, market, and community. We use the Anglo-Saxon expressions. So we can say that in Italy we can speak about civil society instead of using the word community. It's just a question of terminology, but the meaning is exactly the same. What is important is that we truly need this third pillar, which is the so-called community or organized social structure. And so, of course, the third sector belong to the third pillar. They were there before. They have always been there. And because they are there, but not with their own identity, but they are there present only because they are at the service of the state or of the market. In the States, they are more at the service of the state, and in Europe, particularly in Italy, they are more, in the States, they are more at the service of the market, in Italy or in Europe of the state. So if you have social organization, charities, NGOs, foundations, I mean, this is a wide range of these so-called third sector agencies. They're always acting in favor of the public entity, which can be a state, can be a government, but it's always the state. And this has been a bit of the original sin, which is at the core of all of our problems. I think this was done in good faith, and we are all responsible. And this is the true mistake, because a third sector who's at the service either of the state or of the market is completely useless, and sooner or later will be completely wiped away. And why? Because we cannot think at the third sector as a remedy to the market failures and the government failures. So when the markets or the governments fail. So when the government is unable to do that, let's entrust it to the social, to the cooperative, or if a municipality is unable to set up a new kindergarten, let's do a bid, which is actually the essence of all ill-doing. And I must say that some political regimes are unable to understand that. And I hope that they are truly in good faith, because otherwise they will end to hell. Because it's true that if you're not doing this honestly, then when you do this, this kind of bids are horrible with the lowest price. I can quote, allow me just to say that at the end of the 17th century, the Marquis of Vauban, he wrote a letter, and I must say that I always use this, Excellency, etc., etc. Please try to eliminate these kind of bids with the lowest, lowest value, lowest price, because he understood that. And there are some who truly would like to defend this kind of reality. So you understand that maybe you can basically place the third sector organizations at the mercy of the politician, of the councillor, who, with a wink of an eye, says, if you want to win this bid, you understand, what you should do. And this is why we truly need these kind of players who are the actual expression of an organized civil society truly must be self-sufficient. When you say self-sufficient, which does not mean that they act separately from a government or a market, but whenever they have to be at the table, they have to be part of the decision-making process. So when there are important decisions to be made, they have to be on a level playing field of both the market and the government. So this is the principle of a of circularity, social circularity. So don't use the word subsidiarity. Because that's truly when you speak about horizontal subsidiarity, but it's the fact that people don't study and they don't know, and so they are ignorant, because the true subsidiarity is a circular subsidiarity. So government, market, third sector, They must be able to act and interact on the basis of given preset and predefined protocols in order to define priorities, the priorities of actions, interventions, and the so-called common good. So this idea of subsidiarity, you know where we have seen this? Where did it appear for the first time? In an essay at the end of the 1200s, published by Bonaventura da Bagnoregio, who has been a second Saint Francis. After Saint Francis, there has been a bit of a problem among his followers, and Bonaventura he was a professor of philosophy at the Sorbonne in Paris. So he wrote an essay. So how do you have to govern a society? He explains and describes the roles. You know, they didn't use the word government at the time or state, but anyhow, what was the main authority? So this principle of circular subsidiarity in Italy, but also in Europe, it has been accepted and officialized with decision 131 of 26th of June 2020. So it has become an official term. So for the very first time in the history of Italy, we can speak about co-planning and co-organization. So the key word is co-planning, so joint planning. Some people say, but if we do joint planning or co-planning, this is typical of subsidiarity, of horizontal subsidiarity, which is not the full subsidiarity, because the true full subsidiarity is the circular subsidiarity, because first we have to define the priorities and the goals and the ends, and then we can develop plans and projects. So co-planning or joint planning is in a second stage. So how do you organize that? I want to achieve this and this and this. These are my priorities. I want to have, for example, instead of a kindergarten, I want to have a football area or field. So you basically resort to the third sector, agencies or entities, and this is really pulling the leg. Because what you have to do is, first of all, you have to start by setting priorities and then plan. And this is why we need a social agora, because this is where these entities can exchange views and also be a sort of a think tank. Because if our thought is not action-oriented, we will always be slaves of one or the other of the bosses. Probably the Italians who are here could say, we have a forum of the third sector, but you know, this forum comes from the government, so it's not independent. I have been included, I am a member since its inception, but the minister or whoever is the minister delegates one or the other, inviting the representatives, but when they have already decided, and they believe, but in fact nobody is now attending this kind of forum because the decisions are taking, let's say, are taken beforehand. So I basically invite you to say what you want to say, but I have already made my decision. So this is why we need the agora. Because I must say that even within the European Union, this kind of conversation and discussion is gaining ground. Otherwise, we could not understand the recent decisions taken at EU level. So this kind of agora is truly useful for a third sector, which is independent, and in view of the principle of subsidiarity, can collaborate with the other two entities, the state, government and the market, for the goal of a common good. I have a few extra minutes, so one could ask at this point, what does this have to do with the principle of fraternity? Well, it does have to do, because which is the driver or the prime the driver is the principle of command, because a state passes laws, enacts laws, sanctions who does not comply with laws. And who is the driving force of a market? Well, the equivalence of value is the market price. I give you, for example, a given item, and you pay the price of that item. And if you don't pay me that price, I cannot give you this item. So which is the regulating principle of the third pole? The principle of reciprocity. So reciprocity is essential. You cannot have only a principle of command, because we do need to have laws and to have them implemented. But if we don't develop the principle of reciprocity, we inevitably deprive our societies of a fundamental element because reciprocity is a translation of the principle of fraternity. So if I would provide the most simple way of expressing reciprocity, I could say reciprocity is giving without losing and taking without taking away. So to give without losing and taking without depriving. Because in reciprocity there is a mutual way of exchanging, of giving and taking according to your own resources, according to your possibilities. And while according to the markets, I have to give you the equivalent in value. If I would like to buy this kind of object and I don't have exactly the money to pay, I have to basically give up. So even in the light of Fratelli, Tutti, and the many more other documents, when we speak, this is why today it has came to the fore, because otherwise the principle of fraternity is a beautiful concept we all speak about, but a bit abstract, because it basically remains a theory and not a practice. But if we truly want to do that, we have to make sure that the institutional framework of a society must be adapted along these lines. But you could say, is all of this possible? Yes, of course it is, particularly after the same decision 131 of the Constitutional Court. And in other countries, we also had other kind of decisions, and they go in the same direction. So what is necessary is to present this not as the request of a trade union or the claim of a trade union, but rather how to actually promote common good, because the various categories of public and private goods who are essential or assets are not sufficient. We need relational goods, but also common goods, common assets. What is a typical example? Friendship, families, is not a private one, not even a public one. It's a typical example of common good. Environment, water, air. This is a common asset. So since it's a common good or a common asset, it has to be managed with common rules. And this is the meaning of the third pillar. And this is why, at the end of this meeting, which has been organized over these 2 days, should really be met and known by the many, because many really have a very distorted view. Well, good faith doesn't necessarily mean that everything is good. We have to often probably... I want to close with one sentence that I always enjoyed of Tagore, Nobel Prize of Literature a century ago, when Tagore says, don't cry when the sun, at the sunset, because tears will not allow you to see stars. So even today that we are in a difficult situation, we must not cry, because even if otherwise we will not be able to see the stars. So don't cry when the sun goes down. Tears would prevent you from seeing the stars. Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Zamagni, for this beautiful contribution where you have also clarified the relationship between fraternity and social economy in solidarity, and to what extent social economy in solidarity can promote a level playing field and equal opportunities. And you also have clarified the meaning of social agora, which will be then further developed by the other table at the other forum. But now I have a question that we should ask ourselves: but where and how and to what extent can our life improve through social economy and solidarity? And this question, I will give the floor to Professor Jeffrey Sachs, David Sachs, who came from the States to attend this event and truly enjoys a world career of excellence throughout which he has received 42 honorary PhDs, among which including the most recent distinctions, the Tang Award 2022 for Sustainable Development. He has also been director of the Center for Sustainable Development at the Columbia University, president of the Sustainable Development Solutions Networks of the United Nations, academician of the Pontifical Academy of Social Science in Vatican. He has supported Special Advisor to UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, and the current Gutierrez. So his strategies aim at tackling the most complex challenges of our time, that is fleeing extreme poverty, struggling against climate change, man-induced international debt, financial crisis, national economic reforms, controls of pandemics and epidemics. Author and edited a number of many books, several are bestsellers. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for having me. It's really a great occasion to be together to talk about peace and to talk about Fratelli, tutti, because we're in a very bad situation. And Pope Francis has been saying for many years we're already in World War III. And Pope Francis is a very, very wise person, inspiringly wise and inspired wise. And he's right. And when he said this many years ago was kind of shocking to hear, and it sounded more rhetorical than real to me, and I would say it's more real than rhetorical. It was just that he was understanding the dynamics better than I was, and then most of us could see. We're engaged in cycles of war that are spreading, and we don't seem to be able to stop. And today, as we speak, there is an ongoing genocide in Gaza, and today in particular there is a bombing of central Rafah, despite every warning, despite statements by the U.S. President, just as an example, and so on. And yesterday, in the face of all of this, Italy abstained from recognizing the state of Palestine, which is, to me, very distressing. It's worse than that for me because the United States voted against. I regard the United States as the world's most dangerous country, and believe that it is absolutely leading us to destruction the way it's going. My campus was raided twice by the police in the last 2 weeks by an administration that is both responding to right-wing politicians of both the Democrats and the Republicans, because it's not really a difference between the two parties. They're both very right-wing. They're both subject to the Israel lobby. They take money from large Jewish donors. that are part of the Israel lobby, and they're responding to the large donors to the universities. And today I'm just reading one of my fellow Harvard graduates, another Wall Street billionaire, and these are generally very dangerous people, actually. I don't mean that lightly. They have so much money, so much power, so much arrogance. They were generally the B and C students in class, not always, but generally. That's okay, but they weren't the best. But they become the richest and the most powerful, and are really dangerous and irresponsible for that because there's no accountability to them. This one says today that he's stopping the donations to Harvard because it should embrace Western values, and that he has halted donations because of how it has handled anti-Semitism on campus. I can tell you, I'm a Jew. I'm a Jewish professor. I was a Jewish professor at Harvard. I was 42 years at Harvard. I never experienced one moment of anti-Semitism, by the way, at Harvard University, because it was so many Jews around. Jewish donors, Jewish faculty, Jewish students. That's fine. All of this is because Israel is committing a genocide, and some students are saying that's not right. And then suddenly, that's anti-Semitism. And then suddenly, someone with billions of dollars says, well, I'm going to stop funding you. And then the administrators say, well, we better call in the police. We better arrest those students. This is the dynamic of what's happening right now. I'm speaking a little bluntly because we need to have some clear talk. This is one of our biggest problems, is we do not speak clearly, almost at all, almost at all. I wouldn't, by the way, I have tenure. I don't know what it means anymore. We'll find out. But without tenure, I wouldn't even dare to say one word of what I just said, because I'd lose my job. One of my colleagues stepped off the street to take pictures of the police raiding, and he was arrested. And then my very brave university, when asked by a reporter what happened to Professor so-and-so who was arrested, says, we have no comment. Contact the New York Police Department. This is a university about its own professor who was swept off the street, arrested. The university could care less, except that one of my colleagues at the School of International Public Affairs leads the counterterrorism division of the New York Police Department, and she is an adjunct professor, so it's a pretty close relationship. They probably knew. They didn't want to say. By the way, when the NYPD was asked about the professor that was arrested, they said no comment. And then I asked a friend of this professor, and the university did not contact him for 48 hours after his arrest. So this is the milieu that we're living in. That's why Pope Francis is right. That's why this encyclical is extraordinarily important. It's really worth reading again and again. I read it again this morning, and I realized I had missed important things in it because it needs a lot of reading and pondering. There's a section on war, which is what I want to focus on, because of how dangerous the situation is. Most of you probably know that there's something called the doomsday clock, which is a visual representation of how close we are to human self-destruction that was started in 1947 by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And every year they move the clock closer or farther away from midnight. And the clock is now at 90 seconds to midnight, the closest to midnight that it has been in the 77 years of this clock existing. And they're right, these scientists. By the way, when the movie Oppenheimer came out this year, one of my really wonderful colleagues who leads a campaign against nuclear weapons said we were smart enough to make the bomb, we should be smart enough to control it. But this is actually not correct, because it wasn't we who were smart enough, it was some geniuses who were smart enough to make it, some world-leading physicists, and then they put it in the hands of some of the stupidest people in the world, who happen to be U.S. government officials, for example. And so suddenly this weapon, which could not have been created, by the way, other than with incredible genius, is not in the hands of geniuses. It's in the hands of fools, dangerous fools, who have wanted to use it time and again. So we're not in good hands. We're not in hands of smart people who are deeply considering what to do. Joe Biden's not very smart, by the way. He's not the worst, but he's not very smart. I've known him for a long time. I'm not out to insult him gratuitously. I'm out to insult him because he's leading us to global war. That's the problem. So I wanted to make a few points about what Pope Francis says in this encyclical. First, he says, at issue, and it's really worth reading again, paragraph 258, he says, at issue is whether the development of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons and the enormous and growing possibilities offered by new technologies have granted war an uncontrollable destructive power over great numbers of innocent civilians. First footnote, COVID, I've studied this for 3 years as head of a commission. COVID probably came out of U.S. lab research. So I would put that at around 98%. It came out of a Chinese lab probably, but it was U.S. funded, a U.S.-China cooperative program funded under something called EcoHealth Alliance by the National Institutes of Health in a specific research project called Diffuse, which you can look up online. So that's already what the Pope is saying. We have weapons beyond control. Interestingly, by the way, if you release a virus and it kills 20 million people, you don't have to be accountable, because the CIA put out a 2-page statement, no, it wasn't us. And that's all. So you think we find out? No, they're not going to tell you. And if you say, but this, and this, you can get in a lot of trouble, by the way. Maybe knocked off, I don't know. But one thing is, they'll never tell you. So this is a problem with having these powerful weapons. And then the Pope says, the truth is that never has humanity had such power over itself, yet nothing ensures that it will be widely used. We can no longer think of war as a solution, because its risks will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries to speak of the possibility of a, quote, just war. Then the Pope says, never again war. Then he goes on, it should be added that with increased globalization, what might appear as an immediate or practical solution for one part of the world initiates a chain of violent and often latent effects that end up harming the entire planet and opening the way to new and worse wars in the future. In today's world, there are no longer just isolated outbreaks of war in one country or another. Instead, we are experiencing a world war fought piecemeal, since the destinies of countries are so closely interconnected on a global scale. I watch these wars very close up because I'm engaged every day in the UN. Ukraine, Gaza, Taiwan, they're all deeply interconnected. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the same fools that are driving all of these. And you can't penetrate this, doesn't matter. They don't listen, and they don't have to listen. They walk off the stage when they want to. They answer a question if they want to. They don't answer a question if they don't want to. And if they don't like the question, they just lie about it. And that's the power of an empire and the arrogance of an empire. And that's how it is. Even I've been 43 years in what I do, and I know all these people personally. They don't talk. They don't have to talk. Anyway, it's all confidential. Nothing we can tell you, Mr. Sachs. So there is no public agora when it comes to our life and death. It's all confidential. And the worst enemies of the state are the ones that leak documents like Assange. That's why they're trying to get him. Because that's the real enemy of the United States, someone who would tell the truth. So we can't even have a real discussion. You only see things on the side. I see things because of where I am, not because anyone is in the U.S. is asking. The war in Syria, which started in 2011 as a CIA operation signed by Obama, never discussed, in 2012 could have come to an end, but it continues till today. Why? I know why. You don't. I know why, because Kofi Annan told me he was the special envoy to try to establish peace, and he told me in 2012, Jeff, we had the agreement, but the U.S. blocked it. They were the only ones blocking it. They wouldn't accept anything unless Assad left the first day. Did you read that in the newspaper? No. Is there any story about the CIA operation to overthrow Assad? I know in the New York Times they carried the story 2 days in the last 13 years, both in 2016. This is a rigged operation, ladies and gentlemen, and our lives are at stake. That's a problem. It's really a problem. It's beyond the grassroots problem because the big weapons and the missiles and the tanks are not grassroots. They are at the top. And it's confidential. And it's $1 trillion business of the U.S. alone. And it's about a $2.5 trillion business worldwide. You have a big business here in Italy. There's a big business in Germany. There's a big business in France. There's a big business in UK. We don't hear anything about it. All we hear is a narrative, an official narrative. So then the Pope goes on in paragraph 260 to say, in the words of St. John the 23rd, it no longer makes sense to maintain that war is a fit instrument with which to repair the violation of justice. Every war leaves our world worse than it was before, and I love this line. I used it myself. I didn't, but I like that the Pope has said it. Now I will quote him, that war is a failure of politics. And the reason that that's in my opinion, an important statement is the most famous statement about war in modern history is by von Clausewitz, which is also a smart statement, who wrote in 1832 that war is the continuation of politics with other means. And the smart part of that observation is that at the core of these wars are political issues. Who owns what rights, and so forth. They can be resolved politically. War is a way of addressing politics. But I like this. I'd say war is a failure of politics. It's not a solution. You can't solve any of these issues through war. And boy, the United States has proved for the last 60 years in my lifetime, every single war has been a debacle. Even from the narrow, greedy, aggressive, imperial point of view of the U.S. From Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Nicaragua, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Ukraine. These are disasters, every one of them. They haven't solved one single problem. They haven't solved a single political solution. They have taken millions and millions of lives, cost trillions of dollars, never have been discussed honestly among the American people. With the American people, the only way we know about anything is leaks. The Pentagon Papers, or what Julian Assange was able to put on websites to tell us the documents. You know, by the way, I'm sorry to meander, but our CIA director today, who's actually an intelligent person, although I don't know if he's a responsible person, and his agency is certainly not a responsible agency. It's a rogue private army of the President of the United States. But our current CIA director, William Burns, was the U.S. ambassador to Russia in 2008. 2008 was the time when George Bush Jr., who at the time I thought was the worst president we ever had, but I keep getting proved wrong because they keep coming up with even more remarkable examples. But in 2008, Bush said, we'll expand NATO to Ukraine. That's why we're at war, ladies and gentlemen. I could speak to you about 20 hours about that if we had the time and interest. But we're not at war because Putin is a megalomaniac recreating the Russian Empire and thinking he's Peter the Great, which is some fairy tale of U.S. propaganda. We're at war because the United States wanted to expand NATO to Ukraine, which was not a good idea because Russia did not want the U.S. military on its border, especially because the U.S. government is addicted to regime change. So it didn't want it there. Totally understandable. If we had any prudence at all, we wouldn't have pushed the point. But in 2008, William Burns sent a memo, which you can find online. And the title was, Niet means Niet. No means no. And the point of the memo was, it's not just Putin, it's the entire Russian political class that opposes NATO. And he explained why, very logically. And he sent it to Condoleezza Rice. Now, first question. Did he send it to the American people? No. Did we ever hear this argument? No. Was it ever explained to us one moment how dangerous this was? No. So how did we see the memo? Because Julian Assange posted it, thank you very much. But it's such a weird world that the CIA director wrote this memo 16 years ago, but has never once been asked or talked about it because no one could reach him to ask him a question. He's the CIA director. We're just the American people. So we're at risk of World War III every day now with nuclear alerts in Russia for reasons that were perfectly plain 16 years ago and have never been discussed. Not once in the mainstream American media or at the podium of the White House or with any skilled, knowledgeable interlocutor, nor in congressional hearings. And when I begged the New York Times, and I'm not a nobody, I begged the New York Times for 3 years, run 800 words from me online. It doesn't even have to take your print edition. They would not do so, to say that this war had a reason and had causes beforehand. When the U.S. helped overthrow a neutral Ukraine government in 2014, I also happened to know about it by coincidence because I was asked by the next government in Ukraine to come talk to them, which innocently I did. And then I understood how the overthrow had occurred because it was explained to me when I got there. Well, that's why you're at risk, ladies and gentlemen. That's why the prices have gone up. That's why the energy markets are distorted. That's why the economy is in trouble. Is any of this explained to you? I don't think so. Because in Europe and in the United States, we don't even talk about these things. in the mainstream. We talk about them in the social media. We talk about them in the counter media. I get labeled a Putin apologist for the things that I know. So I'm sorry to go on. But the point I'm making is that we are really in a serious trouble. And we need transparency. And I like the idea of a ministry of peace, because at least a minister of peace would do what a foreign minister is supposed to do. Foreign ministers are supposed to be diplomats. They're not supposed to be arms procurement agents. They're not supposed to be warmongers. Annalise Baerbock is the biggest warmonger on the European continent, the German foreign minister. The foreign ministers across Europe are talking about how we have to raise armaments, how we need more war. The president of Lithuania tweets, Russia delenda est. Are we kidding? Is that what a president of Lithuania tweets? Russia must end?